Hey, welcome everybody. It's good to see my friends here. Um, we're going to be talking about sharing your story, and I like that it's a small group, intimate. It almost feels like it's conversation, which I think is the right way to do it. So, why don't I pray just to start our time, and then we'll get into the heart of the content that I have here. So let's pray. God, thank you for today and this opportunity to delve into our own story a little bit, to learn how to sharpen it so that we can share with boldness and effectiveness and the ability to relate to people in the way that they need to hear. So we ask for your blessing on this time, your involvement with us as we kind of look into our own story and have the courage to do that. So lead this time in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, I first wanted to ask if any of you have worked on your own story at all in the past, and have you worked on preparing your testimony before?
Yeah,
Many years ago.
long ago.
Was there something that you remember from that, or something that was helpful about that process before?
All I remember it was for speech class,
Oh, it's
college, as a Bible college.
okay.
And I hated being in front of people. Somehow I made it through. So
So it was prepared in order to speak in front of a group of people, but you've never taken the time to prepare it to be able to just speak one-on-one with somebody.
dude,
Okay. Well, good. Well, hopefully we'll break through some of those barriers today. But what I would like to propose is a paradigm shift in how testimonies are prepared. Because if you go on any mission organization's website, you can find there, if you look hard enough, a place where they encourage you to prepare your story, and encouragement that it is an effective tool for evangelism in this day and age. And there's a lot of merit to that traditional process that each of these ministries have. In that traditional process of preparing your testimony, they will ask you to describe what your life was like before Christ was a part of it, how you came to trust Christ, including a conversion moment, and what your life has been like since you trusted Christ. And it's actually a very good way to think through and organize your testimony, kind of that before, how it happened, and after. And actually, all the work that I did to prepare my testimony several times over the years was helpful in how I tell my story now. But I still think that there's some limitations to that linear way of telling your story of before, what happens, and after. And the first of those, and you'll have to start getting your handy-dandy note sheet ready because you're going to have a fill-in here in a moment. But the first is that, not the first point, I'll tell you what that is, but the first idea of why there's a limitation to the linear way of telling your story is that many people don't have a conversion moment that describes what happened. And so they feel like, oh, well, I don't have a story to tell because I don't have a conversion moment. Or that conversion moment happened so early in life that it really didn't change how he lived. You know, we were 4 years old when it happened, and nothing much changed at that time until a much later time. So, on your notes, I put it this way. The conversion moment can be a point of confusion. Second, there might be a considerable gap between that conversion moment and the point of life when you went all in with Christ. So when there's a gap like that, like when you came to know Christ at the age of 4, but it was only in college that you started to kind of really take this relationship seriously. It might beg the question for a listener who's hearing your story that conversion didn't really do all that much, and it wasn't really effective in changing your life if it happened at 4 or 7 or 8 or whatever it was, and the change in your life didn't happen till later. So the second point to fill in is the gap between the conversion and the point when you went all in with Christ can be confusing. The gap between the conversion and the point when you went all in with Christ can be confusing. And third, many people aren't saved from a life of heinously disgusting sin. You know, how many here were saved from a life of heinous, sinful life? No? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wait, facing? Yeah. Cool. But he still looks guilty. Yeah.
Yeah. He just got out of his plate. Tattoos and everything.
Yeah. So this is the problem with the linear way of telling your story, because if you aren't saved from a life of, heinous sin, then you might be tempted to think that your testimony isn't particularly powerful or relatable. And so what I want to share with you today is that I think that we can craft your story in a way that is relatable, understandable, and powerful, whether there was a conversion moment or whether or not you had a sinful life history that you were rescued from. So that next fill-in is a powerful faith story is the one that's most relatable. And one below it says, it doesn't need to be sensational to be relatable.
Dude.
And I think that's something that is a problem in the story, the faith story building exercises. If it doesn't, there's a temptation to feel like if it's not sensational, then I don't really have a story. But I'm here to tell you that you do have a story to tell, and that is powerful and relatable, and we're going to unearth that. But what I'm asking you to do today is to make a mental shift from how you have thought about or maybe even told your story in the past. That might seem counterintuitive, but follow me on this train of thought. Most people think that they must tell their story with all sorts of historical life details that chronicle how bad their life was before they met Christ or before they went all in with Christ. But this usually ends up being a longer story with several tangents that make the story longer and unfocused. But also consider the fact that a linear way of telling your story hinges on that conversion moment. There's really a lot of focus on that conversion moment. Tell us when it happened and what your life has been like since. And this culminates in a place of completion. So the traditional way of telling your story, your faith story, is the conversion, and then, everything has been hunky-dory since. And that is not as relatable. Most people that we talk to, and especially any not yet Christian, can't relate as much to a story that ends with completion because their story isn't that way. And so if we can tell our story from a lens of brokenness or unmet longing, the person who's listening can relate to our story in a much easier way. And that story that isn't wrapped in a tight, perfect bow or from the place of completion. So it's changing it to, on point number 1, people can't relate as much to completion as they can to brokenness. So point number 1, people can't relate as much to completion as they can to brokenness. So I'm going to ask you to delve into your history to uncover what I call a God-shaped hole. Have you heard this quote by Blaise Pascal? Some have. Jim's probably heard this one. There is a God-shaped vacuum in the heart of each man which cannot be satisfied by any created thing, but only by God the Creator, made known through Jesus Christ. And Pascal was a smart guy, mathematician. So I think he knew what he was talking about. I think it's an insightful thought to think of, and it begs a couple questions. What is that God-shaped vacuum, or I like to refer to it as a hole? What does my God-shaped hole look like? And the second question, what created things do I fill that hole with before I discover that it is only God who can fill it? So what does my God-shaped hole look like? And what have I done to fill that hole before I learned that only God can fill it? Jim, do you need the notes, or would you like to notes?
Yeah, actually, I will answer. You have your
No, well, he's going to give you one. The rest is extra.
Okay. Thank you.
You can have one that thing that doesn't make or print.
Thanks. Sorry about
Thank you.
So that quote by Pascal begs those two questions. And if you can answer those two questions, you're almost ready to walk out the door. For us, if we can name our God-shaped hole, or that place of unmet longing, that place of brokenness that we've struggled with our entire lives, if we can do that, that becomes the lens that you tell your story through. So instead of completion, you're telling your story through a lens of brokenness. And people can relate more to brokenness than they can to completion.
Yeah.
So it's just making a mental shift on how we tell our story. So point number 2 is your God-shaped hole describes your most relatable point of brokenness. So I'm a photographer. So I would like to give you a camera illustration with this. When I pull out my camera, I have a lens on it. And usually, for me, I don't want to always have to move closer and farther. I have a zoom lens on there. A common zoom lens that I have on my camera is a 24 to 105 millimeter focal length. And so when I have that on there and I have it all the way opened at 24, I can see, mass amounts of stuff. But when I zoom it in to 105, it narrows it down to just a smaller thing. So kind of think about being on the Staten Island ferry, and you see there's the Statue of Liberty. Oh, but there's the New York City skyline. I'm taking with the 24 millimeter, I'm taking all the skyline and the Statue of Liberty. But if I zoom it into 105, I'm just focusing on the Statue of Liberty, and I'm leaving the detail of the whole New York City skyline out of the picture. And so that's an important distinction to think about, because to have a clearer focus in my photo, I have to intentionally leave out some of the details that I had at 24 millimeters. In preparing your faith story with the lens of your God-shaped hole, you're going to need to leave out some of the unessential details in order to focus your story for maximum relatability and power. And some people wrestle with this, with leaving out all the nitty-gritty aspects of their story, why they were so bad or what was so bad. But we need to remember that crafting our story is about making it relatable and understandable to the listener. It's more about the one who hears our story and not us being content with the content of our story. It's about crafting our story that is listener-focused, that they can relate to and remember, something that sticks with them. And remember, brokenness is more relatable than completion. So point number 3 is keep your story focused by crafting it around your God how God solved your issue of brokenness. Keep your story focused by crafting it around how God solved your issue of brokenness. So what I want to help you think through is coming up with 3 words that will become the outline of your testimony. I hope to help you land on what your God-shaped hole is, what you struggle with, or what you have tried to fill with all sorts of things or addictions or actions. So consider that your word number 1 would describe your God-shaped hole. Your word number 2 would be what draws you to how only God can fill that God-shaped hole. And word number 3 is what in the character of God keeps you relying on God when you still struggle with this gap. And if you can land on 3 words that describe the process of dealing with your brokenness, then you will have a quick 3-word outline that you can use to share your faith story rapidly, or you could expand it out, to the length of the bus ride or plane ride if you want to. But knowing how to organize it mentally helps you be able to do that. Does anybody have any questions at this point from these things that I've talked about?
Point number 1 under shifting the focus that people can't relate as much to as they can to.
Can't relate as much to completion as they can to brokenness.
Oh, yes, I do.
Okay, so without any questions, I'm going to give an example of this. And so I'm going to bring Clarice up to sit with me, and I'm going to interview her to kind of unearth a little bit of her story and hopefully help her unearth the words that could possibly be the outline for her faith story. So thanks for doing this.
Yeah, sure.
This was planned all of about 45 minutes ago. So, my original interviewee must be really late to church. So today being, turn forward the clock day. So anyway, so Grace, I know you a bit, but I don't know your whole story, and I would love to hear more about it. What helped you, or what is your story of the process of you coming to know Christ? Tell me a little bit about that.
Long version? Short version?
Whatever details you'd like to.
It's okay. All right. Well, basically, I went to church. I grew up going to church with my family. And I, at one point, remember my mom saying, we're late, we have to get to church because if we don't go, what will people think? And it just didn't sit right with me. I thought, what? Why does it matter what people think? That was odd to me. But then kind of fast forward a little bit, I went to a church camp where I heard the gospel message and was invited to come into a relationship with Jesus. And that's where I came to know the Lord, about the age of 11 to 12. And then kind of went from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, how much fun still real when you're not.
And I want to know all of it.
I know you do.
But I'm curious, you said you were about 12 or 13?
11 to 12.
11, 12. So would you say that at 11 or 12, you kind of went all in with Jesus and you never looked back, and there's been a consistent growth that entire time?
Everything was perfect after that.
Oh, perfect.
Smooth sail.
She is not listening.
No, there was a struggle for sure. It was hard to even think about going back home. Because I knew that the way I was feeling and what home felt like were very different. Like I wasn't quite sure what to do with my faith when I went home. Yeah. And so things were perfect after that. I still argued with my mom. I still fought with my brother. Couldn't stand him. And so I felt like I'd made this choice, but I was still in this big sinner. I still couldn't get everything right. And weren't you supposed to get everything right when you came to know Jesus? Wasn't everything supposed to be easy? And yeah, you weren't supposed to be like this big sinner anymore. Yeah. So I think that's probably what stuck with me more than, wait a second, this is a relationship with the God of the universe. This is a personal thing. Not everything's going to be perfect. And when things aren't perfect, he's with you. He's with you. But I didn't get that until a lot later in life, like college time, where I began to understand that I didn't have to earn God's favor and earn my way into keeping that relationship. Because that's what I thought. Yeah. If everything wasn't just right, then I was going to lose that relationship with God. It seemed very, what do you call it? Tenuous? Yeah, it was just like temperamental, conditional. That's the word I can take.
You felt like the relationship with God was conditional, or with the people around it?
Well, both. Yeah.
So you felt like at times, like, I mean, that literally the relationship might end if you were doing a certain thing.
Yes.
Would you say that you put a lot of stock in your behavior?
Absolutely.
As to whether you were right with God or not was based on your behavior?
Definitely.
So was there a point that you sort of rectified that idea that there was this behavior? Your behavior was the condition upon which a closeness with God was. Was there something that helped you understand that it wasn't, your relationship with God wasn't based on your behavior?
Yeah. I don't think I can pinpoint like this very second, but it was an understanding in college when I was in a Bible study and like discipleship chart where someone shared with me the verse about how you cannot be separated. You're never going to be separated from God. Like this, if this is a choice that you have made, your name is written in the book of life. It is solid. It is forever. And no, you're not going to get things perfect. And there's no expectation to do it because Jesus is the perfection for you. Like that was mind-blowing, life-changing. And I no longer had to feel like I had to get everything perfect.
Wow.
Because I certainly felt like I did before. Absolutely. Yeah.
Here's interesting. And so have you, over the course of the time since college and that time that you understood that it was God's perfection that completed you, that you didn't need to, I mean, have you still wrestled with this issue of your behavior has to be perfect, or I could be, the relationship with God could be severed because of my imperfection? Have you continued to wrestle with that for since that time?
I think I wrestle with my own expectations, but I don't feel like God's not going to accept me. Like, that was seriously the done deal. That scripture shared with me that I was never going to be separated from God. That was it. It was like, I am secure and I know I will be with God perfect enough, which, it's impossible to be perfect. But I personally still struggle with having self-expectations or just thinking that others have that expectation of me. So I still wrestle with that. So not so much this relationship, the vertical, but more just within me.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned earlier, your mom's reaction about going to church or being late and it being so people-oriented, and that now you have sort of a similar people-oriented concern, and that has there been any movement within yourself over the last number of years to kind of help you understand that you don't have to perform for people or be a certain thing for people?
I think there's always that intrinsic battle because that was what was modeled for me growing up. I mean, definitely there's been growth in that, but I think when we learn something for birth, I mean, that's still going to be part of the struggle in your story. It's going to be a battle, but I know I'm not alone in that. And I know that at least even if there's that battle within me, I know that it's not a battle like between me and God. So, yeah.
So these are some of the things that I've heard you say. You've mentioned this issue of imperfection for yourself and how that has always made you feel less than or something that you struggle with. And you described that it was the character of God, of his perfection, that once you understood that, his perfect acceptance of you, that it kind of eradicated that fear of you being imperfect. And that in a sense, even though you've wrestled with that over time, you sense perhaps a security that comes from a relationship with God that helps you deal with that issue of your behaviorism or your imperfection. Are those things that sound like it's accurate to your story?
That's pretty good.
So,
good job.
So perhaps those could be the three words. I mean, you still need to wrestle with it a little bit yourself, but I mean, imperfection being kind of what describes your God-shaped hole, or your greatest need or unmet longing, how God's perfection meets that, and how his security that he gives to you because of you being a child of God helps you to continue to deal with that, even though you wrestle with that as a lifelong struggle. Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we get pouring that?
Yeah. You're me.
Well, that's pretty cool. And that's what I want. Any of you, if you want to do that, we can have a 20-minute conversation. We can unearth something like that. But we're also going to, on the back side of your sheet, there is a worksheet that we are going to have some time to work on together. But before we go there, I want to share a little bit of my story. So it was probably about a year ago that a friend asked in a group session, if I could describe my faith journey in 3 words, what words would you come up with? And I thought, my first thought was, that's ridiculous. How can you possibly come up with just 3 words that describe it? And he gave us a few moments, and within 5 minutes, I came up with the 3 words: outsider, invited, and included. And those words have not changed since I really landed on those in that 5-minute time session. And all the work that I've done beforehand on writing my faith story actually allowed me to drop in those 3 words that I came up with into that story and sharpen it better so that it's more relatable. And so I'm going to share my story, and it's going to be hopefully about 1 to 2 minutes. It's not going to be long, but hopefully you get the picture. So has there ever been something that you thought was true, but later found out that it wasn't? When I was a small child, I thought that a 747 airplane was a plane that flew over my house at 747. And it was only a couple of years later that I found out it's not the name, it's not the time that the plane goes over, it's the name of the type of jet. Because I thought, you had the 825 bus, you had the 930 train, you would have the 747 airplane. Well, in high school, I thought that happiness would come when I was friends with the popular kids in my school. So everything I did was geared towards trying to get these people to think that I was important and worthy of their friendship. But things didn't work out the way that I wanted. And I felt like an outsider all of my high school years, and all of my years felt like an outsider. I remember one time breaking down crying in front of my parents, saying that I don't have any friends because the people who I wanted to be my friends were not returning that friendship. And so I felt very alone, empty, and like an outsider. But some people that I knew invited me on a weekend retreat, and I went because I wanted to make friends. But while I was there, I heard 3 things that I did not know about. First, I heard about a God who unconditionally loved me, and that was very attractive compared to all the conditional friendships I had around me. 2, I heard for the first time the significance of why Jesus Christ came to earth, that he came and died for the issue of my sin, which is what separated me from God. And if I invited Christ to become the center of my life, I could be restored to a relationship with God. And 3rd, I saw people who honestly loved and cared for each other, and I wanted those kind of friendships. And I realized that weekend that those friendships began with a relationship with God. So God was working in me to realize that he was inviting me into a relationship with him. And when I realized that invitation was there for me, that I didn't need to do anything to impress God or try to be liked by him, he just loved me. I was sitting in my bed home alone at the end of the weekend thinking about all I'd heard, and I said, God, I don't know a lot about you, but I know that you're powerful and that you can change my life. And things started to change from there. And one of the things that really changed was I felt included into a family that I had never felt like I had been included in before. I'd always felt like an outsider, and this group of people who were following Jesus included me in on everything that they were doing. It felt like I was completely enshrouded into a family, and that's made all the difference. Even though I still wrestle with feeling like I don't belong or like I'm an outsider, I know that I'm always included in this family of God. So there is a short, I don't know, did anybody time it? 1 minute, 2 minutes time frame. Did you hear those words? Outsider, invited, and included. No flicks. So those words should be in your testimony. That's the idea of coming up with those 3 words that describe it. One thing that you may have noticed is I had a definition of sin in there. And that's an important factor. If you notice down on the bottom, I have some helpful tips for communicating your faith story. And one of those that I want to highlight is that it's always a good idea to have a definition of sin, so people will know what they need to turn from and what they need to turn towards. I made it clear that I needed to make a decision to turn towards this guy who was inviting me into relationship. Another thing that you want to pay attention to is trying to keep the Christianese jargon out of your story. There are words that we take for granted because we're a part of a church or we've been walking with Jesus for a number of years, that someone who is not a believer is not going to understand. And so we want to make our story as relatable as possible. So if you use a word like, I was washed in the blood of the Lamb, or God sanctified me from that point on, or whatever. I mean, a word like that can be a word that people hear, they kind of go, what was that word? And you continue on their story and they're like, what was sanctified? And they're just stuck. We want to make your faith story smooth sailing so that they continue along with you all the way through. So try not to use words that are overly spiritual or overly religious that may cause them to be distracted. And last week, John said this in the sermon. When you compare what the Apostle Paul shared in Acts 26 when he talks to an unchurched man and what Paul shares in Acts 22 when he talks to church people, it's different. He emphasizes different parts of his story. He's not lying. He's emphasizing different things. And this goes back to my illustration of using the 24 millimeter to the 105. We're going to focus in on the 105, just on the Statue of Liberty. What are those 3 words for you? And we're going to need to let some of the other details go because we're focusing on our story's 3 words that are most relatable and have power so that the person who listens is going to keep engaged and realize, I can relate to this person. So, but there are a few other points on there that it will be good for you to peruse at your when you work on your faith story and take some time to do so afterwards. So flip over to the second side of the worksheet, and this is going to be where you're going to do the dirty work. And we're going to spend a few minutes letting you work on these things. So all of these things we've sort of talked about, and it gives you an outline. In that center column, you have word 1, a word that describes a God-shaped hole. Word 2, a word that describes how God met you in this unmet longing. And word 3, a word to describe what keeps you pursuing God when you still struggle. So, but one thing I want to talk through before, because you may not know what that hole is. It might be hard to put a word to that. And I'd be glad to have a conversation with each of you. That's no problem. I'd enjoy doing that. But I gave right under that first section a list of motivational themes. And what motivational themes are the things that motivate people. And so one of these may be yours. My motivational theme was belonging, or my God-shaped hole was belonging. Now, I didn't use the word belonging in my story. I used the word outsider. But outsider is a descriptive word that showed that I wanted something and never felt like I got that thing. So your motivational theme may be one thing, but your descriptive word may be something that's adjacent to that. But things that people often wrestle with: achieving success, finding peace, belonging, relationships, needing forgiveness, seeking happiness, or contentment is another word, or a lack of contentment. What was the word that we landed on for Clarice? Imperfection, wrestling with imperfection. She could have used behaviorism, or something about her behavior needing to be what she needed, or what she wanted to get right. I mean, she needs to do that a little bit more work to be able to kind of say, this is my word, and this is how it describes that God-shaped hole. But these are examples of what your motivational theme could be, what your God-shaped hole could be. So I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to kind of start writing some notes in here. And at the end of that 10 minutes, we'll kind of come back together, and you can talk or ask questions about how you're doing in this process, and then we'll go from there. So, sounds good? So take about 10 minutes. If you need to get some space, you can do that, and we'll come back in a few. All right, we're going to circle back. How has that process been for you so far? Did anybody come up with some of their words, or at least their motivational theme, their God-shaped hole?
I came up with one word.
Okay.
Community.
That's a powerful one
And
that almost everyone can relate to. Story.
one.
Yeah. And what about God's character? meets that hole for you?
And then let's see. I'm still kind of fleshing it out, but God's promise to be with me always, anywhere I am, even unto death. I think that ties in with my part about being fearful of going to hell in the beginning, the way I was programmed. And then I guess the part that addresses that is I am enough and more to me because he purposely created me with gifts and uniqueness. He loves me unconditionally, and he's brought people into my life who do like me and are true friends and wounds.
Yeah. And with lonely, and there are definite aspects of who God is that meet. Like the word presence comes to mind. Like his presence with me fills that hole of loneliness that I can't seem to do anything to shake on my own.
Sorry, it was on like
it could be love. It could be something that God did, like an invitation that you felt from God that helps you realize, there's something of his character.
I like presence. That was really the same. So that would be the second word.
That might be the second.
Yeah, I think presence is really good because that, might have to deal with presence.
So if presence is the second word, you may not have filled anything down in the third row, but what is it about God's presence that keeps you kind of relying on him when you still feel lonely at times? I'm assuming that is still kind of a unmet longing that continues on.
Oh, well, what immediately comes to mind is it's unconditional love. And that's two words, but it would be true.
Well, you could use the word unconditional because we know that is conveyed with love. So, I've consistently felt lonely my entire life, but the presence of God has changed how I see things. There is a God who loves me unconditionally, who is with me, even though I wrestle with being lonely to this day. You see how quickly you can communicate that, even if it's on an elevator. So, continue to process and think through what words, and again, my deep longing was belonging, but my word is outsider. So, what word conveys the concept that you're wrestling with? And so you said a number of things met that of the character of God that met you in that loneliness, but his presence is a word that is descriptive of that.
Yeah, I really like presence.
So one thing that we were talking about kind of off camera a few moments ago was how we can change our story or customize our story based on what we hear from a person that we're talking to on a plane, or even if it's a family member. We can share our story based on things that, we ask. I do a lot of asking questions because I want to find out what motivates somebody, what their hole might be, whether they have words for that or not. And I may not tell them what their hole is, but I'm like, what I hear is this, can I share my story? Because I feel like it relates to where you're at in your story. And you may customize it a certain way to some person, that you change it to something else to a different person. So we can customize it based on what a person is sharing with you. So I want to wrap up our time, and I know that this is a worksheet that you're probably going to need to spend a little bit more time on and prayerfully think through what you want to convey or communicate to the people that you're going to share with.
Oh, it's just another word for presence that I thought of is known.
Nothing.
No.
Oh, no.
Because as a single guy, that's something that I really struggle with, is like being known kind of on a daily basis, you know?
Oh,
I had a coworker, the former manager of Worldwide Challenge, and her name just brilliant lady. It's just slipped my mind. You would know her, but she talked about being single and then being married, and kind of how that, in a funny way, is like, I'm always known now. Like, that's, I can't ever get away with it. But as a single, I can relate to that as being known. But also, is going to mention, you brought up a good point about asking good questions. This is super important and valuable, and it gives a good, easy starting point. But I think ultimately, we got to remember it's about the communication relationship with them. So it's, because I've been in a lot of ministry opportunity where people are so fixated on sharing what they have to say, and it just becomes a dialogue or monologue, maybe, where you're just talking to them. So asking good questions so that you hear from them, this is all valuable, even if you don't have a perfect 3-word tell it, you know what I mean? It's just finding where they're at, and then you can minister to that. So that's a very good point.
that's true. Right, that they don't feel like they're just a project.
Exactly. That's right. So you're trying to fix them or solve them. Yeah.
Did anybody else come up with some of their words that they can be that can describe their story? Jason, I envision a one-on-one time with you.
Yeah. My effort to do it.
Okay, cool.
So if it
If not, no worries. So, all right. Well, I'm going to wrap up with these thoughts. Most people think that they must tell their story with all sorts of historical life details. And the result of that often is a much longer story with a lot of possible rabbit trails. And so this work that you're doing here, hopefully, is going to help you focus on telling your story from the perspective of your brokenness, because that's where most people can truly relate to you and where you are coming from. It doesn't need to be sensational in order to be relatable, and you get to share how God entered your story and helped you with your God-shaped hole of unmet longing. But it means leaving out some of the details that aren't essential in order to focus the lens through the lens of your unmet longing, and how God is the hero of your story. And ultimately, I think this is a more effective and relatable approach in our modern relativist thinking world. So the number one goal is being relatable and understandable, not using those Christianese jargon words, so that they can track with your story the whole way through, whether it's 30 seconds or 5 minutes. So I want to thank you all for coming, and we'll turn the camera off, but I'll still be here for us to talk through if you want to talk through